I never thought of myself as someone who would break into another person's house. Not in a million years. But when you live next door to a man like Frank Dahlan and the police won't help, and your dog has been missing for 3 weeks, and every neighbor you talk to just looks at the ground and says, he's a private man, eventually, you stop being the person you thought you were. Frank bought the house at the end of Meadow Lane in late August. Before that, the property had been empty for nearly a decade. The previous owner, an elderly woman named Margaret Hurst, had died under circumstances that everyone described as peaceful a little too quickly. She'd been found in her armchair, mail piling up in the box, the television still on. Nothing strange about it, nothing at all. But the real estate listing had stayed up for 9 years, through 3 different agencies, the price dropping and dropping until Frank came along with cash and no questions. I didn't have a reason to dislike him at first. He was quiet, kept to himself. That's the kind of neighbor you want, right? He had a gravel driveway and an old pickup truck that he never seemed to drive anywhere. I'd see him sometimes, standing at his kitchen window looking out at nothing. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that didn't register emotion so much as simply occupied space. He never waved, never nodded, just watched. The first thing I noticed was the smell. It started about a week after he moved in. A heavy, sweet odor that drifted over the fence line, especially on warm evenings. It wasn't sewer. It wasn't garbage. It was something else, something thick and organic, like meat left too long in a car. I called the city about it. They said they'd look into it. They never did. Then my dog, Jasper, got out. Jasper had never run away before. He was a golden retriever, dumb as a sack of rocks, loyal to a fault. I let him into the backyard around 9 p.m. like I always did, and he just wasn't there when I went to let him back in. The gate was still latched. The fence was still solid. He was just gone. I walked the neighborhood for hours, calling his name. Flashlights sweeping into bushes under parked cars, up and down the alley behind our row of houses. Nothing, no barking, no jingling collar. Just the sound of my own voice bouncing off garage doors and the occasional porch light flicking on, then off. The next morning, I knocked on Frank's door. It took him almost 4 minutes to answer. I know because I counted. I could hear movement inside, heavy footsteps, the creak of floorboards, something being dragged across the floor. When he finally opened the door, he was sweating. He wore a stained white t-shirt and jeans, and his hands were red. Not bloody, not exactly, more like raw, like he'd been scrubbing them for a long time. "Yeah," he said. I asked if he'd seen my dog. I described Jasper. I pointed at the fence between our yards and said he must have gotten through somehow. Frank just looked at me. He had pale blue eyes, almost colorless, and they didn't blink enough. "Ain't seen no dog," he said. Then he closed the door. I should have let it go. I almost did. But that night I heard something from his backyard, a sound I still can't fully describe. It was low and rhythmic, like something heavy being dragged across concrete. Then a pause, then a thud. Then a sound like wet fabric being folded. I called the police. They sent an officer out, a young guy who looked bored and tired. He walked around Frank's property, knocked on the door, had a brief conversation I couldn't hear. When he came back, he told me everything was fine. Frank had given him permission to look around the yard, nothing unusual. "He's got a lot of gardening equipment back there," the officer said. "That's probably what you heard." I wanted to believe him, I really did, but the smell got worse and I started paying attention. I work from home, which means I'm in my house all day. I started keeping a notebook. I logged every time I saw Frank leave, which was almost never, every time I heard a sound from his property, every delivery truck that stopped at his address. There weren't many. No Amazon packages, no mail even. Just an old white van that came every 2 weeks, always on a Tuesday, always between 2 and 3 in the morning. It would pull into his driveway, stay for about 20 minutes, then leave. No headlights, always idling. I tried looking up Frank Dahlan, nothing useful, no social media, no obituaries in his name, no property records beyond the sale. It was like he'd appeared out of nowhere, fully formed, with cash and a truck and a house that no one wanted. That's when I started researching the previous owner, Margaret Hurst. It took some digging. Old newspaper archives, county records, a few calls to people who'd lived in the neighborhood for decades. Here's what I found. Margaret Hurst had a daughter who disappeared in 1997 at the age of 19. The case was never solved. The daughter's name was Emily. And according to a neighbor who still lived 2 streets over, Margaret never stopped looking for her. She'd sit on her front porch every evening watching the road, waiting. She became a fixture, a sad old woman with a faded photograph and a story everyone had heard too many times. Eventually, people stopped listening. Then she died. Then the house sat empty for 9 years, and then Frank Dolan bought it. I know what you're thinking. I thought it too. Maybe Frank was the one who took Emily. Maybe he came back to the scene of the crime. Maybe he'd been watching that house for years, waiting for it to be cheap enough, abandoned enough for him to move in and finish whatever he started. But it's worse than that. I broke in last night. I know how stupid that sounds. I know I should have called someone, told someone, done something official, but I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jasper's face, and I heard that dragging sound, and I smelled that sweet, rotting smell that never went away. Frank left around midnight. The white van came, and he got in, and they drove off. I waited an hour to make sure they weren't coming back. Then I climbed the fence. His backyard was a mess. Overgrown grass, dead leaves piled in corners, a rusted grill tipped on its side. But in the center, near a concrete slab that looked like it might have been a patio once, there was a fresh patch of dirt. About 6 feet long, 3 feet wide. The ground was still soft. I didn't stop to dig. I couldn't. I went straight to the back door, and I used a credit card on the old lock, and I was inside before I could talk myself out of it. The house smelled like bleach and something sweet underneath. The floors were linoleum, peeling at the edges. The kitchen was clean, too clean. No dishes, no food in the fridge, just a bottle of bleach under the sink and a roll of black trash bags on the counter. I went down to the basement. The stairs were narrow and steep, and the light switch didn't work. I used my phone flashlight, sweeping it across cinder-block walls and a concrete floor. There was a drain in the center of the floor. A big one, industrial-sized, the kind you'd see in a commercial kitchen or a meat locker. Around it, the concrete was stained dark, not rust, not paint. There was a freezer in the corner, an old chest freezer, the kind with a latch instead of a handle. It was humming quietly, plugged into an extension cord that ran across the floor and up to a power strip on the wall. I didn't want to open it. Every instinct in my body told me to leave, to call the police, to run, but I thought about Jasper. I thought about Margaret Hurst sitting on her porch waiting for a daughter who was already in someone's freezer. I thought about the white van, the 2-week schedule, the way Frank looked at me with those colorless eyes. I lifted the latch. The freezer was full of Ziploc bags, gallon-sized, stacked neatly, labeled with a black marker. I shone my light on the labels, dates, names. Some of them I recognized from missing posters I'd seen over the years. Some of them I didn't. And at the bottom, in a bag that was fresher than the others, I saw something golden, something that looked like fur. I closed the freezer. I closed the basement door. I went home and I locked every lock, and I sat in the dark until the sun came up. The police are here now. I can hear them talking to Frank in his driveway. He's smiling, calm, cooperative. They're not going to search his house without a warrant, and he's not going to give them one. But that's not what's keeping me up at night. It's the dates on those bags. Some of them go back 20 years, some of them go back 30. But here's the thing I can't stop thinking about. Frank Dolan looks like he's in his late 40s. He moved in 3 months ago. The first bag in that freezer was dated 1985. Frank would have been 12 years old, so either Margaret Hurst wasn't a victim's mother waiting for closure, or Frank isn't even the one I should be afraid of, because the white van came back this morning. It's still parked at the end of the street, engine running, no one inside, and the passenger door is open.